Team Expansion exists to transform communities among the unreached by planting biblical churches. Our goal is to make disciples that make disciples and to plant churches that plant churches. Today, almost 3 billion people, about 40% of the world's population, have absolutely no access to the gospel and have never heard the good news of Jesus Christ. These unreached people groups are made up of men and women, boys and girls, who will live and die without knowing the power of God's grace unless someone tells them. What are we doing to change this? Team Expansion is a group of 350 missionaries from all walks of life, serving in over 46 countries. We have different passions, gifts, and roles to play, but each of us is sold out to transforming communities among the unreached by planting biblical churches. From serving disaster victims in Asia to students in a Muslim land, from remote groups in South America to gypsies in Eastern Europe, from tribal villages in Africa to major cities in Asia. Each place is as different as the people who serve there, but around the world we are meeting needs, mending hearts, sharing the gospel, making disciples, and planting churches that plant churches. Every day, Team Expansion is impacting individuals and entire communities for eternity. The time is at hand and the fields are ripe. Join us as we change the world for Christ.
And it's just beautiful the way you've got everything set up. I don't know who you have as your professional stage designer, but all these little special deals. What is this anyway? I kind of wanted to see. It's filled with Christmas lights. I don't know if you can see that, but it's just a great idea, and it was just beautiful. And it gives the nice church look with the mosaic back there, but yet it's modern. And this guy has so many petals. It's like a rose bush. There's just petals everywhere, you know. And what a great. Let's give the Great Lakes group another hand. They did a great job. I try to play the piano sometimes, but boy, that piano player. What is your name? Nolan. He just really gets into this, you know. And I thought, boy, and then I leaned over to Dave and I said, could I rock a headband like she has? And without hesitation, he said, certainly, you could do that. Yeah. So I enjoyed. What are all your names? Nolan and Katie, Sarah, Shiloh. Okay, what a great job they did, and so beautiful. And thank you all for your welcome and for the way you've been praying for this wall of unreached peoples. We'll mention that in a moment or two also, but it's obvious you've been at work because of all those little completed Post-it notes along the top. I didn't see too many panels that didn't have a completed. So while the wall has been here, basically in the last 24 hours, somebody, one of your fellow members or volunteers, at least somebody, has pronounced to God the name of every last known unreached people group that remains on the planet. Let's give a hand to all those folks who really, it's kind of like back in the old days when the priests used to labor in the temple and they would keep the fire burning or something all day yesterday. People were here. And you know, in a way, prayer is work. It's not something that's natural for us to stand in front of a panel of thousands of different tribes and castes and kindreds where the number of people who know about Jesus is so desperately low that if you were to walk among those lands and walk from village to village, you might walk for weeks and never encounter a single person who's ever heard of Jesus before. It's not easy to stand there in front of those panels and ask God and labor with Him and sweat with Him and say, Lord, please help us change this. But that's exactly what you've been doing. So it's really encouraging to those of us who have basically spent, like David said, as did Dave and Brenda in Taiwan, that we've spent our lives dreaming about the day that a church would care about unreached peoples, and you've demonstrated that, not only by having the wall here, but by praying so fervently for it. So hats off to you. You know, we're in a series, and this series is interesting to me, where we went wrong. And when you first hear that, you're probably thinking, oh boy, did I wreck the car, or what did I do? And then we get into this and we find out that in Genesis 3, which is where we are today, that we've messed up. And of course, Satan, you remember, told Eve that she could be like God. And for actually centuries, all the way back to the Garden of Eden then, we have dreamed of having that kind of power. Remember, Satan said to Eve, for God knows, this is in Genesis 3, 4, and 5, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. And we've struggled with temptation ever since that day in the garden. All over the world, humankind, people just like you and I, we want to be the top dog. We want to be superior. We want to get attention. We want to be loved. We want to strive after pleasure and selfish gain. The hope we have comes later in chapter 4, verse 26. At that time, men began to call on the name of the Lord. And since that day, when people began to call on the name of the Lord throughout all the generations, all the way up to Romans 1:16, I am not ashamed of the gospel, because it is the power of God for the salvation of everyone who believes, first for the Jew and then for the Gentile, or those who are not Jews. So God has spoken clearly. We have trouble with this. When we see all those people groups on the wall, there are probably maybe 2 or 3 billion. That's B like the word Bravo. That's a lot of people, 2.5 or 2.9 billion people that are represented on those walls. We struggle with how God is going to address them on Judgment Day, don't we? Because the percentage of people who know about Jesus is so low among those groups. There would be many, not just a few, who have no clue. The people that I remember David and Brenda were working with, I got to visit them on the field, and they took me to a temple where people were worshiping in the form of Buddhism. And I just kind of got lost in that temple and sort of hid back in the corner in the shadows and just tried to be invisible and just watch what people were doing there. And it's really very close to Dave and Brenda's place where they lived. And I just watched. And here down a stairway over to my right was this ebony, I think it was probably ebony, statue of a dog. Hardwood dog statue. And as guys would come up, they would start stroking this dog, not in the place where I pet a dog, but in some of the most embarrassing places you could imagine that you could pet a dog. And they'd bring their girlfriends up and pet this dog in those embarrassing places. And then they just giggle. And after a while, I had to go up to Dave and I said, what in the world are they doing? Petting that dog in those places that are very private. What in the world? And Dave said, well, they want to try to get power. And they think that by rubbing those dog parts, that it will somehow give them power to conceive and power to be virile and masculine. And they do that so they can, well, that's why they were so giggly and embarrassed almost in front of their girlfriends and all. But I thought, this is so weird. First of all, because it was a wooden dog statue. But secondly, because they have no idea. So what is God going to do with those folks? We get to Romans 1, 19 through 20, all the way from the garden, when people messed up and wanted to be like God. We get to Romans 1, 19 through 20, where Paul writes, for since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. Now, when I see those young men in that temple across the street from where David and Brenda lived, I think, how is it that somebody could be so deluded about life that they don't get it. And then I think, well, they have never been informed about Jesus and the Bible. And this passage says that somehow there's enough of a whatever kind of imprinting it is, something that God has stamped into the part of us. I guess in computers you have some things that are like software, and that's where the computer reads the disk, and then it gets the information, and now it's ready to go. But there's other stuff that's evidently stamped into the microprocessor, the chip, and it's there when you turn the machine on. It reads that chip, and it's hardwired into the machine's very bowels. It's right into the brain of the machine. When you turn it on, it's got that information. Evidently, God branded inside of us a certain appreciation for good and evil. And what this verse says in Romans 1:19-20, we don't even follow that. It's like the computer coming on and this blinking light that just stares at you with no prompt that you can respond to. It's just this blinking light, and you think, oh my goodness, I should have backed up. All of a sudden, mankind will see Jesus coming and think, oh my goodness, why didn't I know about this? They don't even follow the conscience that God indelibly stamped into their minds, so that this verse, Romans 1:19-20, I want to confess to you, I don't like this a bit. I don't like this a bit. Some of the people I work with, that we talk these ideas over at our office there in Louisville, Kentucky, where Team Expansion is based, and I remember one day when I just told them, I don't like this. And they said, Doug, don't say that. God is in charge of the universe. You don't have the power to not like something. I said, oh, yes, I do. I don't like the fact that you could have 2.9 billion people whose tribal names, the people group names, are written on these panels, and they don't know that they should even be following the indelibly stamped good and evil conscience that's in their mind, so that Paul says they're without excuse. I don't like that. And I think the reason I don't like it is because I'm kind of programmed to think about fairness. That's the way we think in the United States. Romans 3:10, it says, as is written, there's no one righteous, not even one. And I think, yeah, I guess we all do eventually make some kind of error. But people come up to me sometimes when I speak about things like this, and as I walk out, they're almost angry. I remember specific churches where people are so angry, they come up and say, what about the innocent guy in Africa? And it's funny because I love it when people ask that. When I'm standing back in the back of the church and they're going, what about the innocent guy in Africa? Because I answer them instantly. And here's what I say. Oh, he's going right to heaven. And they're shocked because they've heard me talk about this indelible stamping. They've heard me talk about, how we don't even follow what's printed into us, so therefore without excuse. And then they ask this question, what about the innocent guy in Africa? I said, well, he's going right to heaven. And it throws them off guard. And then I say, but in a way, it's a trick question you just asked. What? I ask about the innocent guy in Africa. That's the point. There is no innocent guy in Africa. Paul writes here in Romans 3:10, there is no innocent guy in Africa. That's what he says. As it is written, Romans 3:10, there is no innocent guy in Africa. I think about how this plays out, and sometimes I'm fascinated by it. Imagine with me some African village where a husband and wife are sleeping on their little mat, a bamboo mat or whatever they're sleeping on their floor, and this guy's awake, and he keeps hearing this neighboring village, and there are these chickens clucking over there in the neighboring village. He has no chickens, so he sneaks out of bed, he sneaks over to the other village, he steals one of those chickens and starts to run back to his house, and this guy that owns the chickens catches him. And he says, wait a second, he starts chasing him, and in the process, this guy that's running from him throws a rock or something, I don't know, and the chicken owner falls down, hits his head on a rock, and he dies. And the man who has the chicken now feels bad because suddenly this chicken thief turned into a murderer, and he feels horrible, but he takes the chicken back, he stuffs it under the the hut or something, and then climbs back up and gets back on his mat, and he's sleeping there, and suddenly the wife kind of stirs, and she hears underneath their house. And she remembers, wait, we don't have a chicken. What is that? She puts two and two together. She turns to the man beside her and says, raises up in the dark, what have you done? And then she starts hearing the wailing of the lady in the next door village. And this lady is just crying out of the night, and she's talking about losing her husband, and she's holding her husband in his arms, and he's dead and gone. And this man who stole their chicken is the cause of it. And this woman is listening to all that. She says, I cannot believe what you've done. Now, maybe this lady has never read the Bible before. Maybe she's never seen the Bible before. But she is caring enough to know that her counterpart in the next village over, this lady, is now a widow. And now she'll have no way to get through life. So she's mad, and she starts to hit her husband with the broom or whatever. Because why? Because she knows that's just not right. There's no innocent guy in Africa. But there is good news. And the good news is that God has made a way. Acts 4:12 says, salvation's found in no one else, for there's no other name under heaven given to mankind by which we must be saved. So what is the current situation? Well, we've got about 7 billion people in the world today. And they could be divided up into maybe 16,000 different tribes, castes, kindreds, ethno-linguistic groups, separated by language, or maybe separated by, some barrier of understanding, or even a barrier of acceptance. So they're all separated in these little pockets of people called people groups. And the ones who have the Bible, maybe about a third of those groups, somewhere along that, we're supposed to tell the rest. Now, this might not sound very politically correct, proselytizing the rest. But what we're really doing, as commanded by God, is giving them a chance to encounter Jesus, to discover him. And if upon discovering him they decline, then that's their choice. But at least we did our part to help them discover who Jesus is. If we don't open the Bible to them and help them discover Jesus, then that's when we haven't done our part. And that's when on Judgment Day they will be pretty peeved at us because we didn't give them a chance to hear. And they'll be kind of angry at us, you see, because we didn't open up the Bible for them. Now, if they choose not to believe him, then they really have no recourse, and they can't be mad at us. There are more than 2 billion, in fact, probably almost 3 billion, who are in that situation where no one has yet opened the Bible for them, and they are without excuse because they have not obeyed the conscience they have, but they, at the same time, don't have an option right now. They have no good news. They are, many of them, Bible-less. And the visual symbol of this is like that wall of unreached peoples. Now, when Jesus saw that wall of unreached peoples equivalent in his day, which was village after village after village, harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd, he said, Matthew 9:35-38, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field. Jesus had a heart for the one. All you have to do is look in Luke 15. Some of us met yesterday at a restaurant at lunch, and we were talking about this. The way that the shepherd will sometimes leave as many as 99 sheep in the high meadow to their own resource there, to their own recourse. He'll leave them. Why? If he's lost just one. And he'll search through the rocky crags and go up and down throughout the cliffs and go through the dangerous ledges trying to find the one lost sheep. And when he finds it, he's so happy. He puts it on his shoulder. He comes back and the whole village celebrates with him because the one sheep that was lost is now found. Amen. Now we understand Jesus' story in Luke 15, don't we? We get that. What so many people don't get is this wall of unreached sheep. Every one of those names, an unreached tribe. So the lesson here is that even if we have to sometimes leave The 99, at least they've got grass, and they can pick and keep themselves fat there in the meadow. But the one is lost in the briar patch, stuck. And somebody's got to pick the briars loose and help them encounter the good news. So we tell churches, why don't we just pick one? Let's just pick a sheep. Let's pick a tribe or a caste or a kindred. And so we have been daring your church. Just pick one. We probably got 6,000 churches of Christ and Christian churches. So even if among the stream of people that are kind of like our church, there are probably 6,000 congregations, there are probably 6,000 or 7,000 of these groups. Let's just have each church pick one that's never been reached before. It's going to be hard. It's going to be scary. I was telling the group yesterday at the restaurant at lunch, I took a church recently to one of these unreached people groups, and when they finished, they walked out and said, you know what? We have discovered this trip that we cannot adopt that unreached people group. I said, that's so sad. Why? Because we can feel the kingdom of darkness here. There's like an oppression, and it's demonic. Yes. So why can't we do this? Oh, we could not expose our church to something like that. We can't bring our middle school youth group here, don't you see, Doug? There's no way our high school teens should travel to this. This is too overwhelming. And they did not decide to adopt that people group because it felt too oppressed. What I loved about your group here yesterday was that they basically said, give us a hard one. Help us find a group that is difficult to reach, stuck in the briar patch that nobody else wanted to find. So we say, well, let's call it PACE. Quick little acronym. Pray, activate your entire church, commit to launching a church multiplication movement among them, and then enlist the help and potential of as many people as you can find. Just 4 quick little letters. Pray, activate, commit, and enlist. And set the pace for other churches that really have decided not to do this yet because they think it's too hard. They think it's too demonic. Well, guess what? Most of the unreached peoples live in hard places now, and it feels very demonic. So the question we have to ask is, what if these unreached people are still unreached because we've not done anything about it? What if it's because we have not prayed sufficiently? What if God is waiting on us to pray fervently for harvesters? What if our PACE initiative here at Memorial could be launched primarily by starting with prayer? What a difference we could make. What if hell is larger today than it was yesterday? Because many of us have not prayed. We know, psychologically, mentally, academically, we know that prayer can open doors, prison doors, preaching doors. We know that prayer binds the enemy and opens the heavens doors. Prayer is the plow that breaks up the ground. Prayer launches these PACE initiatives. So if that's the case, is there anything more strategic? Is there anything more powerful? Is there anything more compelling that we should do than to pray? So let's pray right now. Lord, we come to church, and for so many years, our church culture has taught us that if we just come to church and maybe even write down some notes about what the preacher says, and yes, Mark or Dave, they say very intelligent things, and if we just write those things down, that having that academic knowledge, we think, somehow will make us a Christian. Lord, would you convict us of the truth being that what makes us a Christian, that the way that God can see that we're taking this seriously is if we obey your commands. The way that you can tell if we are engaged with you is if we obey your commands. Would you allow us now to engage with you in prayer? Would you hear our prayers that this church could become so engaged in the Great Commission that she would not only keep giving, what we promised to give in faith promise. Maybe next week we'll promise $150,000. That we would not only do that, but that we would obey your commission to make disciples of all people groups. That there would be no tribe left on this wall. And that next year or the year after, we request that someone ship us the wall of unreached peoples, and it arrives, and it is 26 empty black panels. May that day come, Lord, so that then you can come. Matthew 24:14. May all the nations praise you, and may all the nations come in contact with your love. And then we know that you've said there in Matthew 24 that the end will come. Would you help us, Lord, to understand what we have to do here at Memorial, in Livonia, near Dearborn, in Detroit, to reach around the block and around the world to change nations. That's our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. Let's run that video, please.